My name is Joe Esposito. I was Elvis Presley's road manager and right-hand man and a very close friend of mine. I loved him very much. From the time we were discharged from the Army.
For over 4 decades, he stayed silent, bound by loyalty, fear, and memories that refused to fade. Now at 82, Elvis Presley's former bodyguard is finally ready to speak. Behind the glittering lights of Graceland and the roar of adoring crowds lay secrets darker than fame itself. What truly happened in those final years of the King's life? And why has it taken a lifetime for one man to finally tell the truth? Join us as we uncover the heartbreaking revelations of this long-awaited confession, the King and his circle. Elvis Presley wasn't just a singer. He was a revolution wrapped in rhythm. The boy from Tupelo had become a symbol of America itself, dazzling, restless, and larger than life. Yet behind the glittering fame and the echo of screaming crowds stood the gates of Graceland, tall, golden, and silent, guarding secrets no camera could capture. Beyond those iron bars lived a man the world called King, but inside those walls, Elvis Presley was something far more fragile than his legend suggested. The mid-60s had turned into the early 70s, and fame had wrapped itself around him like a beautiful prison. The Memphis Mafia formed the kingdom within the kingdom. These men wore matching tracksuits and carried themselves with quiet authority. They were brothers, protectors, and companions rolled into one loyal force. Among them walked a new bodyguard, fresh from military training, his shoulders squared with purpose. He had answered a simple classified advertisement seeking security personnel, never imagining it would lead him into the orbit of the most famous entertainer on Earth. Elvis had chosen him personally after a brief interview in the living room where everything seemed to shimmer with excess. The singer studied faces like other men studied maps, searching for roads that led to loyalty. He offered the position with a handshake that felt like being welcomed into something sacred. The bodyguard accepted without hesitation, understanding immediately that this job meant surrendering normal hours, normal friendships, and normal life. Days blurred into nights at Graceland. The mansion breathed with constant activity, yet somehow remained lonely. Elvis moved through rooms filled with people who laughed at his jokes and nodded at his observations, but the laughter sometimes rang hollow. He bought Cadillacs for strangers and distributed jewelry like candy, his generosity legendary and seemingly endless. The bodyguard watched these gifts flow outward and began understanding that giving was how the king kept people close. Trust became the most valuable commodity in that golden house. Every person who entered the circle underwent invisible tests. Elvis noticed who arrived first when called and who hesitated. He remembered who kept secrets and who let them slip during careless moments. The Memphis Mafia understood these unspoken rules, moving through their duties with practiced precision. They drove him to recordings, stood outside dressing rooms, and filled the spaces between performances with constant companionship. But cracks had started appearing in the foundation of this carefully constructed world. The bodyguard noticed them during quiet moments when Elvis stared at nothing in particular, his famous face suddenly older than his years. Exhaustion lived in those blue eyes, the kind that sleep could not cure. Performance schedules stretched endlessly forward, demanding more energy than any human body could reasonably provide. Mistrust crept in like fog under doorways. Elvis began questioning motives, wondering who stayed for him and who stayed for proximity to power. He tested loyalties with impossible requests made at 3 in the morning, watching to see who complained and who simply appeared. The Memphis Mafia members grew skilled at reading these moods, adjusting their presence to match whatever the king needed in that particular hour. The bodyguard learned to recognize the weight of isolation that fame created. People surrounded Elvis constantly, yet he seemed desperately alone. He could not walk into a restaurant without causing chaos or visit a movie theater without being mobbed. Normal experiences had been stripped away, replaced by controlled environments where every interaction felt choreographed. Friends were chosen not just for compatibility, but for their ability to function within this strange ecosystem. Emotional dependence grew like vines around the inner circle. Elvis needed these men present, needed their laughter and approval, needed proof that loyalty still existed somewhere in a world that wanted pieces of him. The bodyguard felt the pull of that need, understanding that leaving would feel like betrayal. Graceland had become more than a workplace. It had become a family bound together by devotion to one troubled, generous, magnificent man who happened to be slowly disappearing beneath the weight of his own crown. While the world only saw the king on stage, no one knew the heartbreaks he carried when the lights went out. Graceland nights? The mansion came alive after midnight when the rest of Memphis slept. Lights blazed from every window as Elvis descended the staircase, ready to begin his day while the world ended theirs. The bodyguard had learned to sleep in fragments, catching rest whenever possible between the unpredictable rhythms that governed life inside those walls. Nobody questioned the schedule because questioning implied judgment, and judgment had no place in the inner sanctum. Music poured from the jungle room where Elvis sat at the piano, his fingers dancing across keys with the same magic that had built his empire. Friends gathered around him, their voices joining his in harmonies that would never reach any stage or recording studio. These were sacred moments, pure and unfiltered, when the performer disappeared and something more genuine emerged. The bodyguard stood near the doorway, watching joy spread across a face that carried too much burden during daylight hours. Laughter erupted without warning, filling rooms until the walls themselves seemed to shake with happiness. Elvis told stories that grew wilder with each retelling, his charisma turning ordinary events into legendary tales. He moved between people like sunlight through windows, touching shoulders and sharing jokes that made everyone feel chosen. The Memphis Mafia fed off this energy, their own spirits lifting when the king rose above whatever darkness chased him. Yet mood swings arrived like summer storms, sudden and devastating. The same man who had been laughing moments earlier would retreat into brooding silence, his eyes going distant as though watching something nobody else could see. The bodyguard learned to read these shifts in the air itself, the way animals sense earthquakes before the ground begins to shake. During these dark spells, the mansion grew heavy with unspoken tension while everyone waited for the clouds to pass. Millions of people screamed his name in arenas across the country, their love so fierce it seemed capable of lifting him above any human struggle. But inside Graceland, Elvis walked through rooms that echoed despite being full of people. Adoration from strangers could not fill the specific emptiness that lived inside him, the hunger for something real and uncomplicated. The bodyguard witnessed this loneliness during quiet moments when the performer's mask slipped and revealed the exhausted man beneath. Tenderness appeared in unexpected flashes. Elvis noticed when staff members looked tired and sent them home with extra money pressed into their palms. He remembered birthdays and asked about sick relatives, his concern genuine despite the chaos swirling around him. The bodyguard saw him hold a young cousin on his lap, speaking softly about dreams and possibilities, his voice full of warmth that fame had not stolen. These glimpses of kindness made loyalty feel justified, made the strange hours and constant vigilance seem worthwhile. But anger could erupt just as quickly, volcanic and frightening. Furniture flew across rooms when frustration overwhelmed reason. Television screens exploded under the impact of thrown objects when news reports or shows displeased him. The bodyguard positioned himself carefully during these explosions, ready to protect others while understanding that intervening too quickly might make things worse. The rage burned hot but usually fast, leaving behind apologies and embarrassment that felt almost childlike. Prescription bottles began appearing everywhere, scattered across nightstands and bathroom counters like fallen leaves. The bodyguard noticed them multiplying, different colors and sizes, each promising relief from pain or sleep or anxiety. Doctors came and went through side entrances, their visits growing more frequent as months passed. Nobody spoke directly about what those pills were doing, though everyone sensed the danger gathering like water behind a weakening dam. Erratic behavior became the new normal. Elvis forgot conversations that had happened hours earlier or insisted events had occurred that nobody else remembered. His speech sometimes slurred despite no alcohol being present. He stumbled on stairs he had climbed thousands of times, his coordination failing in ways that could not be explained by simple fatigue. The Memphis Mafia exchanged worried glances but remained silent, trapped between concern and the understanding that challenging the king meant risking exile. Hidden pain showed itself in his eyes during unguarded moments. The bodyguard saw it when Elvis thought nobody was watching, saw the way his face contracted as though absorbing blows from invisible fists. Physical discomfort plagued him constantly, the result of years spent performing with injuries that had never properly healed. Pills promised escape from that pain, but the escape was becoming its own prison. The bodyguard realized with growing dread that protecting Elvis from external threats was the easy part. The real danger came from within, from battles being fought in blood and brain chemistry that no amount of loyalty could prevent. He stood watch over a man who was simultaneously invincible and desperately fragile, beloved and profoundly alone, trapped inside a legend that was slowly consuming the human being at its center. But what was the secret behind Elvis's affairs? The women, the pressure, and the pain. Women moved through Elvis's life like chapters in a book written by someone else, each one arriving with hope and leaving with sorrow. The bodyguard watched these relationships unfold from his position in the shadows, seeing intimate moments that revealed a man desperate for connection yet incapable of maintaining it. Fame had twisted his ability to trust, making him question whether affection was genuine or simply drawn to the spotlight that followed him everywhere. He gave extravagant gifts and made grand romantic gestures, but underneath the spectacle lived a boy from Tupelo who just wanted someone to stay. Priscilla's departure tore through Graceland like a hurricane, leaving destruction that no amount of cleaning could fix. The bodyguard had witnessed their marriage crumbling slowly, watching Elvis pour himself into performances while his wife grew more distant with each passing month. When she finally left, taking their daughter Lisa Marie with her, something fundamental broke inside the king. He wandered the mansion at night, opening doors to empty rooms as though searching for ghosts of happiness that had abandoned him. The heartbreak manifested in ways that frightened everyone around him. Elvis stopped eating properly, his famous jumpsuits requiring constant alterations as weight fluctuated wildly. He canceled appearances without explanation, unable to summon the energy required to maintain his public persona. The bodyguard found him crying in the early morning hours, his face buried in hands that had signed autographs for millions but could not hold on to the one person he truly wanted. These private moments of devastation never reached the newspapers, protected fiercely by the Memphis Mafia who understood that some pain deserved privacy. Loneliness settled over him like a second skin after the divorce. He filled the void with a succession of girlfriends, each one younger and more beautiful than the last, but none capable of reaching the wounded place inside him. The bodyguard observed these attempts at connection with growing sadness, recognizing that Elvis was searching for something these women could never provide. He needed validation that went deeper than physical attraction, needed proof that he was lovable without the fame and fortune attached. His confidence, once seemingly unshakable, collapsed like a building with compromised foundations. Elvis began doubting his talent, questioning whether audiences still wanted him or simply came to witness a relic from a different era. He studied his reflection with harsh criticism, pointing out flaws that nobody else noticed. The bodyguard heard him practicing songs over and over, seeking perfection that remained perpetually out of reach. The pressure of being the king had become a crushing weight that threatened to bury the man underneath. Maintaining that iconic image required superhuman effort that grew more difficult daily. Every public appearance demanded flawless performance. Every photograph needed to capture the legend rather than the tired human being. Elvis felt the expectations pressing down from all directions, from fans who wanted their idol unchanged by time, from managers who needed their investment protected, from family members who depended on his continued success. The bodyguard watched him transform before shows, pulling on confidence like armor that grew heavier each time. The team surrounding Elvis tried desperately to help, their efforts born from genuine love despite sometimes making situations worse. They shielded him from bad news and difficult decisions, thinking protection meant removing all obstacles. But this created a bubble that separated him further from reality, leaving him unprepared for challenges that inevitably broke through. The bodyguard participated in this well-intentioned conspiracy, later wondering if honesty might have served better than constant agreement. Doctors continued their parade through Graceland, prescribing solutions that created new problems. The Memphis Mafia tried limiting access to pills, but Elvis always found ways around their safeguards. They staged interventions that ended with tears and promises that lasted only until the next wave of pain or insomnia arrived. The bodyguard felt helpless watching someone he respected slowly disappear into chemical fog, unable to force salvation on someone who had not truly asked for rescue. Nights arrived when the bodyguard stood outside Elvis's bedroom door, ear pressed against wood, listening for breathing that sometimes grew dangerously shallow. He would enter quietly during these vigils, checking vital signs without waking the sleeping figure who looked vulnerable in ways that contradicted everything the world believed about him. Fear became a constant companion during these hours, the terrible knowledge that one morning he might find stillness instead of sleep. The tragedy approaching cast shadows that everyone saw but nobody wanted to acknowledge. They told themselves tomorrow would be different, that Elvis would find strength to fight his demons and reclaim the joy that once came so naturally. The bodyguard wanted to believe these comforting lies, needed to believe that loyalty and love would prove sufficient. But deep in his heart, in places he refused to examine closely, he knew they were all watching a slow-motion disaster that nobody possessed the power to stop. The day everything changed. The final days arrived wrapped in a strange stillness that settled over Graceland like fog over a graveyard. Elvis moved through the mansion as though walking underwater. His steps slow and deliberate, his eyes focused on distances nobody else could see. The bodyguard noticed how his skin had taken on a grayish pallor, how his breathing sounded labored even during simple conversations. Health had been declining for months, but something about these last August days felt different, heavier, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Exhaustion clung to Elvis like a shadow he could not shake loose. He slept at odd hours but never seemed rested, waking with confusion about what day it was or what obligations awaited him. The bodyguard watched him struggle through basic tasks that once required no thought, watched him lose his train of thought mid-sentence and stare blankly until someone gently prompted him forward. Reality was slipping through his fingers like water, and everyone around him could see it happening but felt powerless to stop the flow. Strange events began occurring with unsettling frequency in those final days. Staff members were dismissed without clear explanation, their sudden departures leaving gaps in the carefully organized household routine. Elvis made odd requests that seemed to come from some premonition he could not articulate, asking people to promise they would remember him kindly, telling them they had been good friends as though preparing for a long journey. The bodyguard felt ice in his veins during these moments, sensing something terrible approaching, but unable to name it clearly. On his last night, Elvis spoke words that would haunt everyone who heard them. He mentioned being tired in a way that transcended physical exhaustion, tired of performing, tired of pretending, tired of carrying the weight of being a legend. The bodyguard wanted to respond with comfort or encouragement but found himself frozen, watching helplessly as the king retreated into his private quarters. The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded final, though nobody recognized it as goodbye at the time. The next afternoon brought chaos that shattered the mansion's usual rhythms. Screaming echoed through hallways that had heard so much laughter, voices raised in panic and denial. The bodyguard ran toward the sound, his training taking over even as his heart understood what his mind refused to accept. He saw the bathroom door standing open, saw the gathered crowd, saw the devastation written across every face. Elvis lay motionless on the floor, and no amount of shaking or shouting could bring him back. Time fractured into incomprehensible fragments after that moment. Paramedics arrived and attempted procedures that everyone knew were futile. The bodyguard stood against a wall, his legs threatening to collapse beneath him, watching them work on a body that no longer contained the spirit that had animated it. He had been trained to protect against intruders and threats from the outside world, had spent years maintaining vigilance against dangers he could see and stop. But he had failed to protect Elvis from the most dangerous enemy of all, the one that lived inside, the one that wore the disguise of relief and escape. Guilt crashed over him in waves that threatened to drown rational thought. His entire purpose had been safeguarding this man, and he had failed at the most crucial moment. The bodyguard replayed every decision, every night he had left Elvis alone, every pill bottle he had not confiscated, every intervention he had not pushed harder. The weight of responsibility settled into his bones, a burden he knew would never lift completely. He had been supposed to protect Elvis from everyone, including from himself, and that impossible task had proven too much. News spread across the world with devastating speed. Graceland was filled with mourners, cameras, reporters hunting for stories about the fallen king. But while the public grieved an icon, while millions wept for the loss of Elvis Presley, the performer, the bodyguard mourned something more personal. He mourned the man who had laughed at terrible jokes, who had given cars to strangers, who had cried over lost love, who had been generous and difficult and kind and troubled. He mourned his friend. Rumors began circulating almost immediately, whispers that Elvis had faked his death, that he had fled to escape the pressure and start fresh somewhere anonymous. The bodyguard found himself hoping against logic that these stories might be true. Perhaps fate was offering a second chance, an opportunity to protect Elvis properly this time. He watched crowds and scanned faces in airports, part of him expecting to see that familiar figure emerge from hiding, ready to reveal the greatest trick of all. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the king never appeared. Reality settled in with cold finality, crushing the last fragments of hope. Maybe he was truly gone, the bodyguard finally admitted to himself. The mansion grew quiet without its center, becoming just a building instead of a home. And the man who had dedicated himself to protecting a legend learned to live with the knowledge that some people cannot be saved, no matter how much you love them or how hard you try. The aftermath and the lies. Chaos consumed Graceland in the hours following Elvis's death, transforming the mansion into a storm of panic and desperate decisions. People rushed through hallways making frantic phone calls, destroying evidence, collecting pill bottles that had been scattered across surfaces like confetti. The bodyguard watched this frenzy with growing horror, understanding that truth was being buried before Elvis's body had even grown cold. Documents disappeared into briefcases. Certain individuals were ushered out through back entrances, and stories were coordinated with military precision by people who had everything to lose if reality emerged unfiltered. The secrets hidden from official accounts would haunt the bodyguard for decades. He knew about the final 24 hours in ways that contradicted every sanitized version later presented as fact. He had seen the amount of medication consumed, had witnessed the decline that everyone pretended to ignore, had heard the conversations about getting help that never translated into actual intervention. The bathroom where Elvis passed away told a story of desperation and dependency, but that narrative was systematically erased and replaced with something more palatable, something that protected reputations and financial interests. The Presley family gathered in shock and grief, but even their mourning was shaped by handlers who understood that legacy required careful management. Certain relatives were kept away from decision-making, their voices deemed too unpredictable or emotional. Management teams moved into action with rehearsed efficiency, crafting statements that emphasized natural causes while downplaying the pharmaceutical reality. The bodyguard sat in rooms where these discussions occurred, listening to truth being molded like clay into shapes that served everyone except honest memory. An official story emerged through collective effort, polished and protective. Heart failure became the accepted explanation, technically accurate but deliberately incomplete. The role of prescription medications was acknowledged vaguely, never in specific detail that might assign blame to doctors or reveal the extent of Elvis's struggles. The bodyguard heard this narrative repeated so often it almost began to sound true, watched it spread through conversations until fiction hardened into accepted history. Pressure arrived swiftly for those who possessed inconvenient knowledge. The bodyguard found himself pulled into private meetings where men in expensive suits explained what would happen if he spoke carelessly. They never made explicit threats, but their meaning was crystal clear. His loyalty was questioned. His future employment prospects dangled before him like bait. His own vulnerabilities examined and noted. They reminded him that he had been part of the inner circle, implying shared responsibility for what had occurred within those walls. Money changed hands, presented as severance or gratitude but understood as payment for silence. The bodyguard accepted it with trembling hands, knowing that taking the cash meant accepting their terms. He signed documents that bound him legally, agreements that transformed his memories into property that belonged to others. The dismissal came wrapped in polite language about moving forward and fresh starts, but he understood he was being removed before he could become a problem. The emotional cost of carrying secrets revealed itself slowly over years that followed. Guilt became his constant companion, whispering accusations during quiet moments when defenses were down. He had protected Elvis in life but was now protecting those who had failed him in death. Nightmares arrived regularly, replaying that final day in endless variations where he made different choices, intervened more forcefully, and refused to leave Elvis alone. He would wake drenched in sweat, the weight of unspoken truth pressing down on his chest like stones. The bodyguard carried memories that nobody else would acknowledge, moments that contradicted official versions but could never be shared without destroying himself. He attended the funeral with lips sealed, watched the bronze casket lowered into the ground while truth remained buried in his throat. Years passed and he aged, watching documentaries that got facts wrong, reading biographies that missed crucial details, listening to people who had not been there explain what had really happened. The silence he maintained became part of his identity, a scar that never properly healed, a weight that grew heavier instead of lighter with time. But this wasn't where the secrets ended. Could there have been a conspiracy behind Elvis's death? The secret he's kept until now. The bodyguard sits in his quiet living room at 82 years old, hands weathered by time but still strong enough to hold the weight of truth he has carried for decades. There exists one secret that has burned inside him like a coal that never fully extinguishes, something that changes everything about how the world understands Elvis's final years. He kept this knowledge locked away through threats and payments and fear, but age has a way of making silence feel heavier than consequences. The time has come to speak what should have been said 47 years ago. Elvis had wanted to disappear from fame long before his death arrived. The bodyguard remembers conversations that happened in the darkest hours of night when exhaustion stripped away all pretense. The king spoke about walking away from everything, about leaving behind the jumpsuits and stages and endless demands. He fantasized about becoming nobody, about living somewhere quiet where people did not recognize his face or expect miracles from his voice. Fame had become his prison, and he desperately wanted freedom that seemed impossible to obtain. Several people approached Elvis during those final months with schemes designed to exploit the devotion his fans felt for him. They presented plans for merchandising and endorsements that would have generated millions by capitalizing on loyalty that bordered on worship. These individuals saw Elvis not as a human being, but as a resource to be mined until nothing remained. The bodyguard watched these meetings occur, saw the disgust that crossed Elvis's face when they explained their visions. He refused every proposal, wanting no part of manipulating people who had given him everything. The refusals brought threats that arrived with cold calculation. These were not people accustomed to hearing no from anyone, especially not from someone they viewed as a commodity under their influence. They warned that rejecting their plans would bring consequences, that they possessed the power to destroy his reputation and legacy. The bodyguard heard veiled references to exposing secrets, to ruining him financially, to ensuring that everything he had built would crumble into dust. The pressure mounted daily, becoming unbearable for someone already fighting battles on every other front. Perhaps when the weight of these threats combined with his deteriorating health and chemical dependency, Elvis made a choice that nobody wanted to consider. The bodyguard has spent decades wondering if that final day was accidental or intentional, if the pills were taken in desperation for relief or in surrender to circumstances that had become impossible to escape. He will never know with certainty, but the timing and the threats and the hopelessness all suggest possibilities that official stories never entertained. Breaking silence at this age comes from a need for redemption that grows more urgent as time runs short. The bodyguard wants history corrected before he joins the king and whatever comes after this life. He seeks closure for himself and justice for a friend who deserved better than the story that was told about him. Setting the record straight feels like the final duty he can perform, the last act of protection he can offer to someone who needed so much more help than anyone provided. The king may be gone, but the man the bodyguard knew still haunts him in quiet moments when memory overtakes present reality. He sees Elvis laughing at the piano, sees him crying over lost love, sees him trapped between what the world demanded and what his soul could actually provide. That ghost will follow the bodyguard into whatever comes next. A reminder that loyalty sometimes means speaking difficult truths rather than maintaining comfortable lies. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.